Today we're going to be looking at Nacon's Pro Compact controller for Xbox One and Xbox Series consoles. As you can see, it's a design for Xbox product which comes with some benefits, namely a button layout that's almost identical to an original gamepad, and it even has Dolby Atmos support if you use a headset through the 3.5mm jack at the base of the gamepad. Here is the gamepad itself, which by and large, its compact form seems to relate more to a slightly reduced grip length and massively reduced weight with the removal of any sort of batteries or planned charge kit. But in terms of overall size, if I compare an original Xbox Series gamepad to it, it's not drastically different or drastically more compact, so you don't have to be concerned if you're looking at this controller and thinking, will it fit in my hands? It's robustly designed. All the buttons have a good range of motion, that they actually feel secure. The back cover of it is lightly textured to provide a little bit of added grip, and the cable itself comes with a braided cord, but take note that it is actually mounted directly to the gamepad and cannot be removed. The only thing to note is, despite me previously mentioning that it has a much lower weight, you do need to be aware, depending on how you're playing, you can obviously get some cable drag using a wired remote. In terms of the layout, you can see everything is pretty much the same, minus a few slight tweaks that I'm not entirely sold on. But offset analogs are still in place. The sticks themselves are pretty much the same height, have the same range of motion, and a similar concave grip with a raised edge around the side. The D-pad itself is not quite as clicky as the original and a little more spongy, but it works well. The buttons have the same range of motion and clicky sensation, but you'll notice they are slightly larger, which makes them a little more cramped. The few changes that are perhaps not the most important to gameplay but notable include shifting down the home button, which makes it a lot easier to find and use, but the cost of that seems to come with putting the share button lower still. And likewise, the view and the menu buttons are tucked up close against the left analog stick and face buttons, which takes some time to get used to. The bumpers themselves are fine, a little less prominent than the usual controllers, but they do have the exact same tactile sensation when you use them. Unfortunately, the biggest problem with the Nacon Pro Compact, although this might be a matter of opinion, is going to be the triggers, which are not pure triggers per se, but more bumper trigger hybrids. Now, I've been a big fan of triggers on gamepads ever since Microsoft all but perfected the design with their Xbox 360 gamepad, and I have no idea if it's a matter of patents or not, but I've seen several other third-party gamepads with conventional triggers, and this seems like a bit of a strange misstep to me. If you are, say, a fan of Sony's DualShock 4, however, then perhaps you will find that more of a perk than a downside. Now, although the build quality may of course not be the same as other more expensive Pro controllers, what the Pro Compact does have going for it is its Pro Compact app. Now, this is something that can be installed on both your Xbox consoles and on Windows 10. The app is identical between the two of them, and you can go look at the review for some images of how that software works, but it is incredibly simple. There are just several pages in which you can do simple things like just inverting the analog stick. You can turn on or off vibration. You can set the D-pad to respond to 4 or 8-way inputs, and of course you can remap every button as you please. Although perhaps the more useful functions are the ability to change the dead zones and range, like the response ranges of the analogs and the triggers. Now, the software comes with some fairly intuitive settings. A good example would be the Pro FPS setting, which is in theory designed for games with sniper scope weapons, which changes the movement of the right analog, so the initial range of motion is really slow. It's not one-to-one, and this allows you to make like fine precision movements if you're lining up a shot, whereas on the other hand the mid-range is conventional, and then the maximum inclination will get you like full range of motion. Similarly, the triggers themselves for a racing game can be set to 0 for 100 to emulate braking and acceleration, or alternatively for the infiltration stealth type games, you won't actually get a response for the first few tens of degrees of the trigger, just to make sure there's no accidental inputs. So overall, I've been really fond of the gamepad. The triggers might be a deal breaker for some, but I spent a week playing both Outriders and Apex Legends, and you eventually get used to the triggers. They function perfectly well. It's just it's far more likely with these sort of bumper hybrids that your fingers will slip off during any particularly intense action. Another thing to mention that might be specific for retro gamers is that using a wired controller means that Windows 10 picks this up as an Xbox 360 style X input gamepad, which made it really easy to play games in my GOG library going back to about the mid 2000s without any issues, whereas connecting an Xbox One S or an Xbox Series gamepad over Bluetooth can often lead to issues. So this has worked perfectly for that, though unfortunately it has no direct input setting for older games still. However, overall, I've been really happy with the gamepad. I think at its low price point as a budget controller, if you're looking for maybe a secondary backup because you're worried about running out of batteries on your primary controller, or for example, if you're looking for a cheap dedicated PC gamepad, I think the Nacon Pro Compact is a fantastic choice. And while the triggers may not be great, I think the overall build quality of it, as well as the excellent software support and just how intuitive and easy it is to use and actually, feel the response of what your changes are making, make it a really great choice.